Welcome to our Star Trek CCG opening packs video series. Today we're going to be talking about the Dominion, which, as noted in our last video, synergizes quite nicely thematically and play-wise with Deep Space Nine. But unlike Deep Space Nine, this is a much smaller set. Like First Contact, you've got 40 commons, 40 uncommons, and 50 rares, but also 4 white border preview cards in addition to the base 130 set. Johannes, can you tell us a little bit about what Dominion's all about?
Absolutely. So the Dominion affiliation is sometimes seen as a kind of evil mirror to the Federation in that it consists of various different species that all work together in some kind of hierarchy. And you have your very powerful founders who are often kind of the cunning guys in the background. You have your Jem'Hadar stormtroopers, which have a huge strength that puts even Klingons to shame. And you have your Water that serve like the officers. They have more of the scientific skills, whereas the Jem'Hadar are the officer and security department. And they bring a couple of interesting things with them. So the founders can work as infiltrators, which rules-wise is quite complicated, but you could actually give command of them to your opponent and then use them on your opponent's turn. If you ever bother to look up the infiltration rules, that's a nice few paragraphs that will leave you none the wiser. But it's a very interesting concept, and it shows what kind of ideas they had. This one, I think, didn't work that well. You also have morph cards that allow your founders to morph into different founders. And that was quite interesting because it was also a way to dial the skill that you need at a certain time. If you have, for example, the founder leader, and you need a skill that gets through a certain dilemma, then you can morph into a different founder, and then suddenly you have the skills that you need. So that was really quite interesting. We also have support for the other affiliations. In the last set we discussed in Deep Space Nine, we had the introduction of headquarters, the Bajoran and the Cardassian headquarters. Now the love is spread to, of course, the Dominion, and also Klingons and Romulans and Federation guys get their own headquarters, giving them free plays at their respective homeworlds. So it evens out as far as free play options are concerned. And we also have several very good dilemmas in this set, and also a couple of interesting non-aligned options. The Binaries dual personnel that has a very good download is introduced here, and also Anya and Salia, who are very good non-aligned support guys. And we also have a very interesting card in Empok Nor, a card that actually seeds without any player controlling it. So it's a neutral card, and players have to fight to command it or commandeer it. And that's interesting because it lets you seed dilemmas under it. So you can fight for it like you would fight for a mission. And then whoever gets to commandeer it gets to do interesting stuff. So also a strategically a very interesting card. And overall, I like this set very much because it was full of star power. You had a lot of familiar faces, a lot of good personnel with lots of skills. And it's from my favorite show, and from my period of the show, I enjoyed very, very much.
Honest question, which maybe I'll ask next video, but I may forget, so I'll ask now. You know, the Jem'Hadar, Cardassians, we talked about Bajorans, Dominion, coming up here. Are these kind of affiliations kind of equally represented in kind of top tier decks in the tournament scene now, or are there some affiliations or like Borg, et cetera, Federation where you see more of them, or is it really just kind of varied?
Depends very much on what kind of players you're playing with. I think Federation is still the most popular affiliation simply because it attracts a lot of newcomers or people who get back into the game. Borg is something that interests a lot of players, but the rules complexity is just something that you wouldn't give to new players. So you don't see them as much. You often see them in high-level plays by very experienced players. Apart from those, the field is wide open. You can today with and I'm speaking always in the virtual format, you have most affiliations more or less on the same power level. maybe apart from Vidians, who haven't had an update in quite a while, or some of the sub-factions. Maybe Marquis on its own is not as playable, but very good as a support affiliation. Dominion, again, is a bit tricky because it usually starts in the Gamma Quadrant, and it's an affiliation that lends itself best to personal battle. And if you're not the type of player who enjoys that, just slaughtering your opponent's personal, then you probably can't play to its full strengths.
I like your shout out to the beginners there. Certainly if I'm ever going to play competitively, Federation is kind of what I would lean into. So that makes a lot of sense, seeing that that's kind of consistent. The beginners might flock to the Federation. Okay. How about collector perspective? What's going on in the set?
So you got Dominion's a really fun set. Johannes talked about it just a little bit. Almost all of the rares in this set are people you'll recognize from episodes, because you've got all of your main Dominion characters, but then you've got a stack of Infiltrator founders. So Martok founder and O'Brien founder and Kira founder. So you're seeing a lot of the main cast, the credits actors, even if they're in a Dominion persona. A couple of other things that show up in this set. You've got your Maquis icon shows up for the first time. You've also got the 4 white border preview cards, which include the Borg 7 of 9, which we don't see again until the Borg expansion. We see Worf, son of Moog, who shows up in the next expansion in Blaze of Glory. We see Captain Kirk, a hint that they've gotten the license to the original series media as well, or at least to the original series crossover episode Trouble with Tribbles, or Tribbles and Tribulations. And Admiral Riker, who doesn't show up again as a card all the way until All Good Things, which is right behind Johannes's head in his background. Those white border preview cards are still sought after, both to complete a set. When you see sets for sale, they are always distinguishing, does it come with this or does it not? Some people do consider them part of the set. Most collectors do. Some people don't consider them part of the set or will sell sets without them. I've always found it to be a lot of fun, and it really completes the narrative arc for Deep Space Nine, and then lets the next 2 sets be much more faction specific and dig into other things. You see another Garrick in this set. Personas of Garrick are a thing that we see a lot of. I think that covers most of the bases from a collector's perspective.
Yeah, I love some of the things that crop up in this set. As a Federation player, it was wonderful to see some character may initiate battle against another faction included here. As someone who just had to, I know we had wartime conditions from, I think it's AU, it could be Q. Yep. But nonetheless, here we have Admiral Layton, who can initiate battle against Dominion, Admiral Riker, who can initiate against Klingon, and I think Captain Kirk can initiate against everyone. So I immediately started having fantasies of my Kurlan Neskos multiplying the power of my one ship that I could actually attack with, and finally taking revenge against my friends who played the other affiliations. It's great to see cards like Michael Eddington. We have the Marquis symbol, but also as a character who is quite significant to the set. We see the continued trend of trying to rebalance the skills gap between the Federation and the Klingon and Romulans, who are still lagging behind a bit. We see cards like Chapok, which have multiple skills as a Klingon. We see Martok is obviously quite good in there as well, and all 3 Romulans in this set are pretty decent. We really are starting to see a rebalance of those kind of cards. We also see quite a few ships cropping up in this expansion as well. The introduction of the Keldon Advanced and the Deridex Advanced. It was rare to see ships going beyond statistics with the number 9, except for obvious exceptions like the Husnock ship at 12 and the White Border Preview Defiant. Here we see the Black Border Defiant coming in after that, but the Deridex Advanced and the Keldon Advanced both reference skills that crop up quite frequently here, which is the Tal Shiar and Obsidian Order components. So here we're looking at examples of where areas you could create subdecks. You couldn't just play Cardassians, you could play a subset of Obsidian Order Cardassians. You couldn't just play Romulans, you could play a subset of Tal Shiar Romulans. So there's quite a few nice little additions like that. Also, we're seeing the continuation of the Chula theme with the dilemmas. So we saw that introduced with Deep Space Nine, but it will continue throughout future expansions. So as someone who enjoys opening packs and seeing those, it was nice to see the continuity between that. Even if it's a rather shaky episode from the early seasons of DS9, I can still do the entire words to Ella Moraine in my head regardless, but it's nice to see that connection to Chula as we go through there.
Honest, from a collector perspective, what do we want to open?
I was always fond of the Klingon warfare. I liked the skills. I liked the fact that he was in the Klingon uniform there. So he was a powerful card, and he complemented one of the affiliations that I had a deck of from the original couple of expansions. So I was very fond of him, and I wouldn't mind seeing him again.
Is that the white border Worf Son of Moog you're talking about?
It should be the white border in this set, yeah.
And you mentioned fair play was interesting here as well, right?
Yes, and I think I touched upon it in the First Contact video. Decipher tried to combat some of the strategies that have emerged. In First Contact, they introduced the balancing act dilemma that punished you if you ran only space missions or only planet missions, which was a popular strategy, because if you run 6 planets, then the Borg ship doesn't affect you. And it made it more difficult for opponent to play dilemmas. First Contact also had the intermix ratio that actually forced you to have at least as many mission points as bonus points. So all those purely bonus point decks didn't work anymore. And what we see here is fair play. This one limits mission stealing quite a bit. So you couldn't steal missions that are worth less than 40 points. So if you played with missions that are only worth up to 35 points and you had fair play, then you were safe from mission stealing. And that was something that many people I've talked to found to be a bit detrimental because it took out a strategic element, but other people embraced it and said, okay, at least that's not something I need to be worried about, that I have to make sure that I can protect my own missions from being stolen, which was a very popular strategy. And to this day, this is something that has stuck. So in the official tournament format, this has actually become a rule. You're no longer required to stock fair play in your deck. It has actually been incorporated in the rules.
But from a collector perspective, what's good?
Market-wise, you'd love to see a USS Defiant. That's always welcome, whether it's white border or black border. It's definitely one of those cards that people love to see. The 2 Advanced, the Kelvin Advanced and the Deredex Advanced, are both always of interest, above average market value quite substantially. Garrick, in another one of his incarnations, Martok for the Klingons, Senator Renak for the Romulans. Empok Nor is another card that, especially because of collectors, another card I wanted 2 of, to have both sides in my collection. Uncommon cards that you might like to see is the Engage Cloak objective. This is one that's relatively simple to achieve and quite powerful in its use. So that's an uncommon card, which often pops up. And the USS Odyssey. The benefit of that is that you have the corresponding commander, Captain Keogh, in this very set. And so the Odyssey has some value, even as an uncommon. On the common side, Jem'Hadar Attack Ship is incredibly, it's a generic card. You can have as many as you want, and it's incredibly powerful with a very limited staffing requirements. That is quite a tough ship. And the young Jem'Hadar and generic Founder are both cards that allow for this sort of interplay of Jem'Hadar and Founders that we talked about in the gameplay mechanics. Ketracel White is the other card which always crops up when discussing this expansion. Ketracel White is a card that affects Jem'Hadar in terms of keeping them in play, and therefore it's one that one has to stock a very large number of. And because we only really saw it significantly here in this expansion, it's always welcome to see whenever you're opening a pack.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. There was a question on the gameplay forums a while ago about how many copies of Ketracel White do people stock these days, and the most commonly given answer was 1 or 2, because there are ways to reset it or to keep it from counting down. And of course, nowadays the rule that you mentioned, was offloaded to a specific card, to white deprivation, and if your opponent doesn't run it, you don't have to worry about that at all. But on the off chance that your opponent stocks that card, you of course need to be prepared. But apparently people are playing it a bit more risky these days.
Okay, well, here we are with our pack. Again, I've never opened one of these Dominion packs before. I think the 6 carat is the rare like DS9, and here we go. We have started out with a Jem'Hadar.
Notice he's got 2 skills.
I've been surprised with a lot of the rare Jem'Hadars. They have as many skills as Picard in the early sets. I always thought they almost overskilled the Jem'Hadar for how disposable they were in the show. So it's a definite deviation from lore. It's good for playing the faction, but it always seemed it's like, wow, you know, these Jem'Hadar are almost all spectacular despite their generic nature.
Yep, I am 7 years old and I can do 3 different major skills.
You would explain to me the symbols, the 2 lower symbols here.
So the one on the left underneath your staffing icon is the Ketracel White icon. It says that this character is dependent on Ketracel White during the original rules for that card. And the one on the right is the Gamma Quadrant icon, saying that it should originate in the Gamma Quadrant unless you've got other ways of playing them or reporting them outside of their native quadrant.
Got it. Well, consistent with the Dominion theme, we have Jem'Hadar, Dominion on our first 2 cards. Mention Ketracel White in the lore, or the box there. Another Jem'Hadar. Okay, yeah, this pack is on theme.
You see a trend. It's fairly mediocre integrity, fairly reasonable cunning, and fairly high strength is the typical layout for them here.
And you can also see that it protects 1 card present from Disruptor Overload, and Disruptor Overload is of course something that can destroy a Ketracel White. So that's one of these fallback devices there.
We have 2 more cards before our rare. Strike 3.
A card referencing shapeshifters. Yeah.
Yep.
What are these icons down here?
These are the Borg subcommand icons. And this is a very interesting dilemma in that it requires personnel on the planet. It's a planet dilemma, but it also requires a ship at this location with an officer classification personnel aboard. So you can't just beam down everyone and attempt. In this case, you'd actually need somebody aboard the ship. And this is just 1 card that introduces more interesting dilemmas.
Johannes, would that also work? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Tom. Yeah, no, I'll get back.
Johannes, would that also work for preventing people from attempting the mission that their outpost is located at if they were just doing it from there?
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
So I'd seen the tactic of people seeding personnel at the outpost without a ship and then attempting the mission where their outpost is. Would this prevent that as well because you need a ship?
Yes, it specifically calls out a ship at this location, so you'd have to play 1 first, yeah.
Yep.
Is this the first set where we have different, Johannes, you mentioned the mission specialist with the, or maybe not, like the Star Trek Next Generation.
The property logo.
Property
logos,
logo.
yeah.
Is this the first time we see different property logos at the top? I don't remember this being different before.
It becomes more and more common. So in First Contact, we mostly see First Contact cards. In Deep Space Nine, we mostly see Deep Space Nine. But as the expansion sets continue and they start to pick and choose from different components, amongst that, the later sets tend to have property icons from a whole variety of sets.
I think for beginners collecting this, it's a little confusing because you look at it, think it's from the Deep Space Nine set, but there's the set expansion icon down here. So yeah, okay. Right. I think the next card is the rare. I'm pretty sure the next card is number 6. So we have a Dominion rare. It looks like is that Jem'Hadar or is that Dominion? Is there a difference? I don't
There's no difference. It is a
okay.
Yeah.
The
Both
Dominion. Here we
the
go.
founders, the Vorta and the Jem'Hadar are all Dominion.
Okay.
Garanagar.
I assume this is the rare. A lot of skills. Yes. Okay. Big strength.
So you'll notice that this is a Jem'Hadar with no white icon. That was the quirk of his character in the show, is that he was not addicted to the white. So even if all of the rest of your Jem'Hadar died, he would not from a white deprivation.
Okay. Yep, a lot of skills. Okay, no white.
And again, we have a call out to a specific dilemma, the Hippocratic Oath, that is nullified where he's present. So that's in line with the story that he was involved in.
Yep.
Another hidden agenda.
Yep.
Right.
So you could use that to protect your Nor. If the other player tries to commandeer it, then you have this to make it more difficult for them.
Yep. Calling out the moment where Cisco blows the station or takes it back and unreclaims so much of it before giving it to the Dominion.
I think this would have made a great foil.
Agreed.
This continues a trend here. We also see the introduction of more Cardassian and Bajoran personnel. Obviously, those affiliations just having been released. It was quite nice to get some additional personnel for them in the expansions immediately after.
You'll notice that one's the Next Generation property logo as well, because that's from the first Cardassian episode with the Phoenix.
Wow, okay.
It's also the episode that made Miles into a much more realized of a character.
It's The Wounded. It's one of my favorite episodes from TNG. It really is quite a special one, and it's set just after Keiko and Mars have gotten married. So it's nice to see that little sort of sitting down to dinner being disrupted by a red alert. That was quite a nice little nod to what life on the Enterprise could be like if you weren't on the bridge.
Yep. And the Cardassian character, alien race design, was based off of them casting Mark Alimo for the lead Cardassian in that episode as a guest star, and accentuating his unusually long and narrow neck.
Huh. Wow. All right. Was he Gul Dukat, Mark Alimo?
He became Gul Dukat, yes.
He did. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a super powerful dilemma, can be used at planet and space missions, and has tough requirements. Two-hand weapons is something that most teams don't usually carry with them. 3 security is tough. Changeling sweep and shapeshift inhibitor and interface generator are cards that didn't exist at that point, or that were very difficult to get into play, or a very specific personnel in Morapol, a Bajoran. So that's a dilemma that even today sees some play.
So kind of an armor skin of evil that you can play in space too.
I'm sorry?
Kind of like an Armus Skin of Evil that you could play in space as well as planet.
Much better because it sticks around. Armus kills and then is discarded. This kills and then it will stay there until you have. Because dilemmas that have the phrasing "unless" or "to get past" mean they don't go away if you cannot fulfill the requirements.
Yep.
Oh, that sounds wow. That sounds.
So it's an Armus wall.
Yeah.
Armus that keeps coming back. Wow. Okay. And we're back to the beginning of the Dominion pack. We've got 1, 2, 3 Dominion out of the 9, so a third, and then a few other images. So okay. The Dominion.
Dan, you might know this. When I looked at the fair play, I noticed that the original print already had the referee icon on it. Was this the first instance of the referee icon?
I believe so.
Yeah, because Q the ref didn't come out until Tribbles. Is that right?
I think that's correct as well.
So is this a typical pack from Dominion? A bunch of Dominion. Good dilemma.
It happens. The rare Jem'Hadar are all very powerful cards, but don't have significant value. So it's neither great or terrible. It's just it's somewhere in the middle there. Whereas the founders, I think, partly because of the connection, because of the mechanic, the infiltration, and just because of the collectability of them as well, command more interest. But it's not an incredibly high value set, but it's a fun set, and I think it does fit in so well with that wonderful expansion of the game into other franchises, and really rounds out DS9 quite effectively.
It's one of my favorite. Sorry.
This is also an interesting set because as far as what sealed product is still out there, it's fairly common to find folks who have a half dozen or a dozen sealed packs still available, but finding a sealed box is pretty rare.
Johannes, you had something?
I was going to say this is one of my favorite sets to open in a sealed format. We often play sealed with rules where you can work with all your personnel from all affiliations and no matter the icons. And then of course it matters to get personnel in your packs. And Dominion is very good in that because I think more than half of the cards, or about half of the cards, are actually personnel. So you almost always get something useful. And there are some really good personnel in there. And as Dan said, also star power in there. So that's always something that lends itself quite well to this kind of rainbow sealed experience.
And something we haven't brought up because it hasn't popped up yet, but I think Premiere is very famous for missions that are very easy to complete. As we enter the DS9 era, introducing these new factions, we have a lot of new missions coming out that are for those new factions, but the requirements to complete those missions are almost orders of magnitude different from the simple requirements of the Premiere set. So I think that's something we'll see as we encounter more missions in the future. But if you look at the missions from this expansion, they are much tougher. That's something we saw with DS9, wasn't necessarily as bad, but this is the first time I really notice that the missions are getting harder and harder to solve, just with their core requirements.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And also the span on the missions, especially in the Gamma Quadrant. If you look at the Deep Space Nine set, the Gamma Quadrant missions have very high span. So for the Superstar Dominion ships, it's manageable. But if you fly in with a 7-range Federation ship, you have a much harder time navigating in that quadrant. So that's something that is very noticeable. You're absolutely right there.
Many of the factions had a ship, in this case, like Odyssey, that have additional stats available to them when operating in the Gamma Quadrant, and that could well be to address that concern.
Yeah. It does feel like a lot of things crept with the power of the commons, where if you put the missions, the span, everything, if you put 2 or 3 common folks on a ship they could staff, it actually feels relatively balanced with what you could do with a Premier set on Premier missions or a Dominion set with Dominion missions.
I can't speak for all the kind of non-collector, non-serious kind of player types, but one thing that struck me opening up these packs is it seems like there are a lot more personnel and ships than maybe I might have expected from opening this up before. I think maybe that started with our alternate universe pack where we opened up 2 uncommon personnel, that JG Picard, even though if we got a rare mission, but we're opening up a lot of rare people, in missions in these packs, which from my perspective, not knowing as much about the cards, there's just that extra coolness when you get a personnel or a ship, and you kind of try to figure it out versus kind of digging into the nuance of an event or whatnot. So that's been a cool trend that I hope continues. Another rare personnel, even if it wasn't one of the huge most collectible people. And with Blaze of Glory, I'm excited too, because I know that a lot of you have spoken about how this is kind of the golden age, and then Blaze of Glory kind of maybe hits the point where there's a lot of cool things going on with the set. So we'll move on to Blaze of Glory and say goodbye to Dominion.